Cloud. Okay. Over to you, Keith.
Brilliant. Okay. So yeah, well, I mean you all know me, obviously. Um I'm going to begin with and this is the I'm hoping it's going to play over the link. This is the jingle that launches the podcast, and I hope you like it.
Welcome to lighter than you started. Turning that frown upside down every single day. Welcome to lighter than you started. And here's your host, Keith Budden.
So yeah, that's how the each podcast starts. Hopefully, it puts a smile on people's faces. I hope it's not just me, but I have found, certainly for me, probably because I've heard it so many damn times now, that it is a real earworm. It just bonds there. But yeah, like then it started. So it's a change of direction, and why is what I'm going to cover in the next 10 minutes or so. It's important to say it's not a pitch. It's not a how-to. It's just a short story about the changes that I've had to make and what I've learned from them. So, quick bit of context, I guess. Most of you know me from my GDPR compliance work. It was a big part of my professional life, and I don't regret a minute of it. Um, and it led to me doing a lot of advising, a lot of speaking, a lot of writing. It seemed like a very logical path, but what I didn't realize, and it's funny, it's come up a few times in the conversation today, is the stress it was causing me. And if you'd actually said to me, it's causing you stress, I'd have said, nah, it isn't. It's just business. It's just life. Um, However, as you know, I had my major heart scare in the end of September. I had an operation last year. I've got to have another operation this year. And a very frank discussion with my cardiologist, who basically said, if you don't cut the stress out of your life, you won't see next Christmas, regardless of what we do. Which was a real wake up call. Um, and so I talked around a few contacts that I know in my industry or in my previous industry, found someone who was interested in taking the business on. So he bought the business from me for probably 20% of what it was actually worth. But I just wanted to shop it. And also, I didn't want a golden handcuff. So it was, it was literally one day I gave him of these. This is how the CRM works. This is where the bank account is, blah, 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 and done. And the next couple of days after that, I was really, really surprised. I suppose the first day, like anything when you have a major change like that, was probably a bit of grief, to be honest. It was just sort of, giving that up. Um, and also thinking, what the hell am I going to do now? But by the next day, by the second day, it was almost like someone had taken two sacks of coal off my shoulders. I couldn't believe how much lighter I felt. Um, and actually, that came to pass this week. On Tuesday, I went to a physical networking group, and somebody there said, um, I can't remember the last time I saw you looking so well. And that was really hit. It was like sort of, oh, actually, maybe there is something in this. So anyway, that as I say, that went, but something kept nagging at me, which was, what do people really need most days? Because over time, I've noticed something is that most people don't actually need that much. They just need space. They need perspective, and most people they need recognition. And that's what it's too little of. And also, part of the reason I launched the podcast Lighter Than You Started um, is because there's so much damn negativity out there in the world. We have 24/7 news, and let's face it, either the national news or the global news is pretty damn depressing most of the time. But all those people who want to talk depression, who want to talk the world down, have a platform. But there isn't a platform for those people who want to talk the world up. Um, and so I thought, why not? Why not start? I'd already done a podcast in the past. I've got all the equipment. I've got, I needed to know. I knew how to do a podcast. I also saw potential for monetizing it in the future, and also the fact that my daily ramblings on there can go on as well. Now I've got them to form an anthology, which might form another book. So there's lots of logic to it. And to also talk about both, because I think you all know about my first book. I don't know if I can't see it to the size on the screen, of course, but A Lifetime of Moments, which is my autobiography, which seems to have gone down really well. So anyway, I launched the podcast. I launched it on the 1st of January. Because as I say, I'd had to do this personal reset in my life, and I do call it a reset, not a reinvention. It's a reset, because going through illness, and certainly the illness that I had, forced me to slow down whether I liked it or not. But in that slowing down, I started noticing things that had rushed past me before, things that perhaps I'd been too busy to acknowledge, things that perhaps I'd been too busy to notice. Suddenly started to become more apparent. And I started thinking about what I wanted the podcast to be, what I wanted it to be about. Part of it is that it's themed, so every day has a theme. So every Monday is the same sort of topic. Every Tuesday is talking about stories. Every Friday is a bit of reflection. Every Saturday is covering things that don't actually fit anywhere else. And every Sunday is a bit of reflection, a bit looking at the thing ahead. I want to keep them short, so each podcast is probably less than 10 minutes. So it's not taking a big chunk out of people's day. And somebody said to me the other day, what's the aim of the podcast then? What's it aim to do? And I said, well, if it just makes one person feel lighter than they started, it feels at the end of the day they feel better than they did at the beginning, then it's done its purpose. It's done what it was there to do. Because the other thing is, I've found that advice is often well meant, but it doesn't last. What people remember are moments when they feel that they've been understood. And the recognition lasts. And I did a podcast on this the other day where I said, advice doesn't age very well, but stories age like wine. And it's true. People listen to stories, and so I say every Tuesday I have a story. So what I'm focusing on now is writing, on podcasting, writing you started, so public speaking, and on conversations. And the joy for me of the podcast, I've got to be honest as well, is in fact I did it yesterday. I can spend like 5 or 6 hours and I record easily a whole week's worth of podcasts, and that's then all I've got to do. The rest of the week I haven't got to worry about that. They're up and they're scheduled, all the social media's up and scheduled, and it's just, I can go and do what I want to do. I mean, yesterday I didn't actually get up till nearly 9:30 in the morning. That's unknown for me. But I woke up, I couldn't believe it. I looked at the clock and it was like, first of all, when I looked at the clock, because I'm hopeless without my glasses anyway, but when I first looked at the clock, I thought, oh, it's 7:25, that's all right. And then when I looked again, it was 9:25, and I was like, geez. Because I had a Zoom call at 9:30. They did cause a little bit of panic, but they've done it. But it was just nice to not have that stress. And it's nice now for me, and because the only person setting time limits for me now is me. I'm not having to answer to people to say, oh, you've got to have this report out by the end of the day or whatever. That just doesn't happen. And that's been a real, it made such a difference. I actually feel happy. I don't think I ever felt down, but I was certainly, I feel happier now than I did. My daughter actually said to me the other day when she popped around, she said, God, you've always been okay, Dad. She said, but the last few weeks you're like an excitable Labrador. And that's and that's just my feel. And why does this matter in business? Because pressure's constant in business. We all know it is. As systems are tiring and people want to feel human at work, because lots of systems are good at getting productivity, they're not so good at humanity. And so it's trying to provide that space, and also realizing that starting gently isn't a weakness, it's a realism. And I made a big point in the podcast in the first couple of episodes, because I launched it on January the 1st, of saying, all this new year, new you thing really is a myth, because it's not new year, new you, you're still the same person. And, if you haven't suddenly got a six-pack by the end of January, you haven't failed. You're still just you. Because I think it's too easy to get wrapped up in that sort of feel of, or you must do this, you must do this. If you don't have this productivity system in place, then you failed. And hey, give me 99 quid and I'll make you a millionaire. Well, good luck with that one. But it's all those sort of things. So all those sort of things I've carried forward into the podcast. So if this has resonated, and I hope it has, then I'm always happy to chat one-to-one. It won't be a pitch, because I don't have anything to pitch anymore. It's just a conversation, but let's learn about what each other do. Let's see if we can find a way to make your day lighter than it started. Because at the end of the day, life should be fun. And yeah, I will end there, and hopefully that was useful. And if anybody's got any questions, very happy to take them.
Not a question. Not a question. It's from me, Keith. But just say, well, firstly, well done. And I actually heard a quote